Hello, my name is Cary Jensen, and welcome to Code Rage 10. This session is FastReport Beyond Basics, Essential Reporting Strategies. FastReport is the reporting tool that ships with RAD Studio and has done so since the RAD Studio release of XE2. In this presentation, I'm going to begin with a cursory introduction to using T-datasets in FastReport reports. I am then going to focus on the types of reports that are most common in business applications. These include reports that use grouping bands, reports that create summary reports, master detail reports, multi-page reports, reports that include subreports and charts, and mailing labels. That's the last slide I'm going to use. We're going to spend the rest of our time looking at FastReports in RAD Studio. This is the project that you can download. I have a slide at the end that I will show where you can go and get this project. This project has two design interfaces. There is a form where we can, when we run the form, we can click on buttons to display the reports at runtime. And I also have a data module. The data module consists of a number of client data sets. There are also some data sources here. The purpose of these data sources is not to display data in the user interface, but rather to provide for linkages between client data sets, so that, for instance, when I do the master detail report, I'll be using the customer client data set and the order client data set, and they're going to be associated by means of the customer data source. Over on my main form, I have a series of reports that I'm using as my examples. I also have a series of FRX dataset components. The FRX dataset components are somewhat similar to Delphi's data source in that it allows you to create an association between a dataset and data that you want to be able to display in a report. Let me show you how that works. I'm going to start by just creating a quick little fast report, and I do that by placing an FRX report component onto the form. I can then double click on the report, and that brings up my design interface. But currently I don't have any data to display, and the reason why is I haven't told the report about my data, and I do that by selecting Report, Data, and it'll show me all the FRX data sets that are in scope of this particular reporting component. So for instance, if I want to place records from the customer client data set, I'll select it right there. And once I do that, I can see fields available for placement onto my report. I'll just create an extremely basic report here. I'll say that I want to have a data set. It's going to be associated with the customer. This is actually a master data band, and that is an essential band in order to print data, one record per or one content of the master data band per record in the data set. I'm going to just quickly, for simplicity, say that I want to create a caption, and I'll drop down here my customer number, and I'm going to drop down the company field. And let's go ahead and make some slight adjustments here. And I've got those two fields there. I'm going to tighten this up a little bit. And when I hit preview, we'll be able to see the contents of that simple report. So just to repeat what I've done here is I have a FRX dataset that's pointing to a live dataset. In this case, a client data set. I've created a master data band that will print one record for each record in the underlying data set, and I have placed fields. Now there are two types of fields here. This is a simple text field that just really represents the text that I am displaying, and if I say I want to edit it, you'll see it's a literal value. That is my caption. This is a slightly different field. This is actually a field from the data set, and you'll see that it is enclosed in square braces, and that informs FastReport that I am going to be displaying information that is not literal, but rather has to come from a data set. In this case, we can see customer CDS, which is the user-friendly name of my FRX data source, and then company is a field of that is in the underlying data set to which that is pointing to. So now when I'm done working with this report, I simply can close the designer and I have my report. If I open it back up again, the work I had done previously is already present. So let's get to the meat of this presentation. I'm going to begin by looking at grouping bands. So let's open up this report here. This report has a number of characteristics that are rather interesting. Like we had in just that example I showed you minutes ago, that there is a master data band, and this is going to print one record for each record in the underlying data set. I've also placed some a group header and a group footer. So these grouping bands organize the underlying data that is going to be presented. Now, one important thing to keep in mind is because these grouping bands are going to provide a structure for the display of the data, it's very important that the underlying data set have a sort order that is consistent with the grouping I'm trying to apply. Normally when you place a grouping band, you come over here and you select that you're going to place a group. A group header is the first thing that you're going to place, and it's going to ask which of the data sets are you selecting and which of the data fields that you want to group on. Then you can either do a data field or you can do an expression, and there's an expression editor that gives you support and provides you with access to many of the functions that are also present in FastReport. You can also specify characteristics of this group to indicate that you want to reset page numbers when the group starts over again, whether you want to implement drill down, which we'll talk about a little bit later, whether to keep the group together, and other settings like that. Okay, let's go ahead and remove that grouping header. So up here I have created my group based on an expression, and in this case the expression is the first letter of the company name. So that means I'm going to be grouping alphabetically by company name, where my first group will be companies with the letter A as their first character, and then companies with letter B, and so on and so forth. I also have a field here. This field also has an expression, and it is, as you can see, the first character of the company name. Let's go ahead and take a look at it so you get a sense of what that's going to look like. So here we have alphabetically and organized by first character, a nice little grouping report. Now when you have, you do need a group header in order to have a group, but you can also have group footers. Group footers are typically used to display information collectively about the group. In this case I'm displaying another expression, which in this case is it says records. That's literal, and then there's the square braces, which says that that's an expression. And in this case I'm doing a count, and one of the parameters that's required when you do count is which band you're counting, and in this case I'm counting the master data band. So it'll show me in the resulting report how many records there are in the A's and how many in the B's and the C's and so forth like that. So that's a grouping report. Let's go on to the next report, the summary report. A summary report is one that doesn't display individual records for every underlying record in the data set, but rather provides aggregate values for that data. This is a very common type of report in that I may not want to have many pages. I just may want to have summary data. And so I've done a few things here. I've created a report title. It's displayed once at the beginning of the report. I do have a page footer, and in the page footer I have an expression that includes some of the system variables that are available to you, including the date and time, so that I can show when this information was produced. And down here I have some simple literal fields as well as some expressions. This first expression is a count, and the count aggregate function can take one or two parameters. The first parameter is the data band that you want to be counting, and the second parameter is a value that indicates whether to include invisible bands and whether to restart the count on each group. You can see that if I go ahead and place one of these fields, we have system variables here, but if I select aggregate value, I can indicate which data set I want to do my counting on, what fields I want to. In this case, if I'm counting, then I could say my aggregate function is count, and then I can say which the data set. I don't have to count fields here. You might notice now that right now it says count and it's empty. I'll select the data band, so I'm now counting. That is the actual expression it's going to create. If I want to count invisible bands, then a 1 appears. If I want to create running totals, then 2 is my second parameter. And if I want both invisible bands and running totals, then 1 and 2 are added together to make 3. And that's how that expression was created. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete this because we don't need it. Let's look at another type. This is also an aggregate function. Right now you'll see the entire aggregate function is here. If I was placing a new field, I'd be adjusting it here, but I don't. Once we place it, it just shows me the text that was created. In this case, it's saying the maximum value. Again, notice the square braces so that FastReport knows that this is not a literal. And then I have my my orders FRX dataset, and the items total is what I'm calculating the max on, and then my band that I'm counting on, and here I'm saying include invisible bands and restart after each group, but there is no group because this is in the summary. Now another thing we can do when we're creating these types of statements is we may want them to look nice. So, and that's where we come to display format. And here I've got a numeric display. Under format here, it just shows you some examples of formats that you can choose from. But notice you can actually come down here and edit the format string manually, and that's a nice thing to do. Now this is just one way that you can apply formatting. There is another way, and you'll see that here. And this is a little more complex example. If I select Edit, you'll notice that after, if you look over here, min, orders, items, and so forth, but right at the end I have yet another expression. Following the pound sign, I have a numeric expression, and that is indicating that's the formatting we can use, or we should use on this particular field. And when we go ahead and preview this, we'll see that both of those fields that I just showed you are formatted. And it's actually the same formatting I'm using. Just this top one is using the formatting defined within the expression itself. And this is where the formatting is applied on top of already a defined expression. Our next report type is master detail report. There's two ways you can create a master detail report in FastReport. One is to create a denormalized table by querying your data and then using bands to represent the master detail relationships. For instance, you might have a query that brings together data from the customer and the orders table, where for each order the customer name appears over and over again. And then you would use a group header to display just the customer information, and then the master data band would be used to display the order information. And I'm going to show. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do a master detail report where we have two linked tables. In this case, we have the customer CDS table, which is sorted by the company field. Then we have the orders table, which is sorted by the customer number, and it's linked through the master source and master fields properties to the customer client data set through this customer data source. What happens is as we navigate through the customer records, we get an automatic filtering of the orders to just the orders associated with the customer record that is the current customer record in the client data set. So what that means is that this master detail report is going to use two of the FRX datasets, and we'll see that when we open this up and view our report data. So we see the customer CDS and orders CDS, and we likewise see the data from those two different datasets over here. Now the primary difference between these types of reports is that your master table will use the master data band, and its immediate detail table will use a detail data band. And then you can have a sub-detail and a sub-sub-detail, all the way to 6 levels of master detail relationship using this form of master detail report. You'll also see that I have a header here, and this group header is grouped on, again, I'm using the first character of the company name, and then I have something else that's kind of interesting here. I'm using a feature called drill down and expanded drill down. So with drill down, if you take this group header here, you'll see that I have a drill down property set to true, but the expand drill down set to false, and that the child property of this particular band is called child 1. Child 1 contains information including what looks like headers, column headers, and then it has the detail band and the group footer for group 2 as well. And the way that this drill down works is very interesting. Let me show it to you here by previewing this report. You'll notice that there's each of my customers, but we're not seeing any of the orders. We do see this that says click to see individual orders, and when we click, the child gets expanded, and this information is the column headers that we found in child 1, and then here's the detailed data for the detailed orders, and we can continue to expand these if we want for individual. Show you one more interesting feature that this particular report has. It uses conditional highlighting. I have two different fields of conditional highlighting here. You'll notice that some larger figures are being displayed in a slightly purplish color, and I have some other figures here that are being displayed in red. Let's go ahead and look at the amount paid field here and see how this is being done. Now over here there's my expression, which is simply the amount paid value, but there's a highlight tab here, and I have an expression, and it says if the items total is less than the orders total, then I'm going to display in red. And I specified that by going into the font and choosing that I wanted to have a particular color for the font, and that's the sample that I get when I'm done. So when we look at the report, if I have a value where the amount paid is less than the items totaled, that means that we're still owed money, and I'm displaying that in red to highlight it and draw attention to that particular value. Okay, that's a master detail report. The next report is the multi-page report. And the multi-page report is gives you the capability of having a number of different formats in a common report. Let's first go into the multi-page report here. And this looks like a normal report at first glance. The difference, however, can be seen up here in these tabs. There's actually 2 pages. In all of the reports we've worked with so far, there's only been 1 page. And if I click on page 2, we'll see that there's yet a different report. Also, going to the report data dialog, we'll see that I have a couple of different FRX datasets that I'm employing from this report. And this is also, we see this over here as well. So the page 1 is a report that can have its own title, its own summary fields, its own page header, page footer. It's a full-on report in its own right, and it will be followed after the last page of the first report will be followed by the second report. And if you have a third report, it will be printed on a new page after the second report has been printed. This allows you to create very complex reports. In this case, I just have 2 tabular style reports, but we could have one page that was a tabular style, another page that was a summary report, yet another page that has graphs and images, and then another report after that, and they could all have very, very different layouts, but they are consistent. Not only are they printed together, but the page numbering will be consistent. So you'll notice that on page 2 and on page 1 I have a very similar page footer. So when we go to preview this report, it looks like there's page 1 of 4, 2 of 4. Now here's the next report. It starts on page 3 and it continues the same page numbering. So again, these are very easy reports to create. In order to create an additional page, you just come up here and say you want a new page, and it brings up a blank report, and that's where you can start adding your report title, your page headers, your page footers, your master data bands, your detail bands, your headers and footers as necessary to create your new page. And that is a multi-page report. The next report is a sub-report. Actually, this report has sub-reports and it also has charts. So let's take a look at this report. It's a much more complicated report in many respects. Sub-reports are somewhat similar to multi-page reports with one very, very important difference. The individual sub-reports don't appear on their own individual page necessarily. That's the way a multi-page report works. With sub-reports, you can have sub-reports specifically placed in particular bands, and that those sub-reports themselves can have you can have them side by side. You could have and that makes for some very interesting capabilities. When you go to place a sub-report in your FastReport project, what happens, and notice I'm just about to place one here. Actually, let me place it. Let's place it somewhere more interesting. Let me place it right here. We get a new page. So it's very similar to a multi-page report in many respects. The important thing, though, is that sub-report will actually be printed at this location. Now, let me get rid of that because that's just going to cause trouble if I don't do that. Now, so here's one sub-report I placed. There's another sub-report. Let's go take a look at the first sub-report. Okay, well, it's going to display information about employees, and the second sub-report is going to display information about customers. And if you look at their placement, you can see they're side by side. And when we preview this, you'll see that we get quite an interesting display of data. Now, that data is being displayed within a master data band, but that master data band, this is really interesting. This master data band is not tied. Unlike our other master data bands, it's not tied to a particular field. If I bring this dialog box up to edit my master data band, you'll notice that I have it as set as not assigned. And I have number of records set to 1. In other words, I only want the master data band to be printed once. If I had it hooked up to the customer table, we'd get these two sub-reports over and over, one for each of the customers' records in the customer's table, and that's certainly not what we want. An important thing about a sub-report is that you don't want to place anything if the sub-report is dynamic. That is, that if its size is based on the number of records in the resulting data set, and those number of records can be different at different points in time, you don't want to put anything beneath a sub-report in the same band, because what will happen is the sub-report will expand dynamically to display all the records within its associated data set, and it'll actually overprint the other any other content down there. And this is one reason why this band is using a child band. So this master data band is going to expand automatically to accommodate the longest sub-report that appears within it. And then we have the child band below it, and that child band will be pushed down in order to make as much room as necessary for the longest sub-report in the band above it. This report also demonstrates the use of a T-chart. A T-chart is the charting tool that's been available in Brad Studio since the beginning, or since the very early days. And what we have is the ability to embed our T-charts within our reports. You edit these T-charts with an editor, but the editor isn't nearly as strong as the editor used for the VCL Forms T-chart. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I do want to show you that in order to use the T-chart components within your report, you are going to have to add the FRX chart object to your within scope of your report. That's going to be necessary. Also, depending on the version of RAD Studio that you're working with, you may have to compile a couple design time packages, because they give the support for T-chart. And there were some versions of RAD Studio where both FastReport and T-chart didn't ship with the product initially, but it was a download that you could get to. It was within a couple weeks of the release of Red Studio. Any case, as I said, the editor for T-Chart is far more like a object inspector with expandable properties, but it's not visual and graphical like the VCL T-Chart. However, the properties are all the same. So if you want to create a nice chart inside your FastReport, my recommendation is, if you're not real comfortable with T-Chart, you might want to actually design the chart using the T-Chart component on a VCL form. Then what you do is you look at the DFM file, and there's all the properties laid out there, everything that needs to be set, and you basically take that information and duplicate it by editing this object inspector like interface. But the really nice thing is you have a lot of charting options. So actually, let me go back in there again and say I want to add a chart, and there's all these different types of charts, pie charts, line charts, bubble charts, bar charts, and so forth. It's very, very powerful, and the result is fantastic. So that's a very nice chart that we have here inside our report. Finally, you may notice that I actually have, I need to get rid of this page, delete, but we do have this this final chart. So this is not only, this chart or this report not only has sub-reports and charts, but it also has multiple reports. So this allows you to create some very fancy reports. The last kind of report I'm going to look at is a mailing label, which is really kind of a mailing label is a specific type of multi-column report. Other types of multi-column reports might be conference badges or business cards or anything where you have multiple columns where you have data from a data set typically repeated over and over again, but it not only goes down the page, but it snakes across the page as well. In order to create a multi-column chart, what you do is you need to bring up the report options dialog box, and you can do that by just double-clicking on a report page, or you can right-click and select Edit, and that brings up the same page options dialog box. So this first page allows you to select your paper type, but when you go to the other options, that's where you see the number of columns, and you can specify information about the borders and so forth of of those columns. Now there's one interesting, really interesting final piece about this particular report, and that is the underlying customer's data set has an optional address to field. Typically when we print mailing labels, if there's no address to, we don't want a blank line there. We actually want to close the, we don't want to display a blank line at all. We want to have a continuous looking mailing label, and in fact that's exactly what we have here. Notice here under this Erica Norman entry, there's actually 6 lines, but most of these mailing labels have 5 lines, but occasionally you get one with 6. And we need to be able to, and that looks right too, doesn't it? So how did we do that? Well, in this case what we've done is, there was a number of ways, but this was kind of a really nice little example. We're using one of the FastReport functions, the immediate if. And in essence the immediate if just extends from here to here. And it's saying if the address to field is blank, then we display address 1, and if it's not blank, we display address 1, carriage return line feed, address 2. And to that I'm concatenating another line feed where I put my city, state, and zip, and another line feed, and then the country code. And that produces that end result. There's only one thing that I want to warn you about, because when I was first making mailing labels in FastReport, I got really stuck because when you place one of these FRX memo view objects, it only places it at a line like that. And when I went to print, it just didn't look right. And you can see I'm missing a whole lot of data, and I was like, what in the world is going on? And then it turns out that by default, the FRX memo view has a stretch mode setting of don't stretch. So there's 2 things you can do. One, is you can say, okay, well, take as much room as you need, and this works out fine. And the other alternative, going back to this field, and if I just squeeze it back up the way it was, I can set stretch mode to SM actual height or SM max height. And what it'll do is it'll actually naturally stretch along with the word wrap. So that's where we get the result we have here. So these are the typical reports that you find in business applications. I've shown you a variety of techniques. There's some other things that I didn't actually discuss, but that you will find if you poke around in these examples, you'll find and can learn quite a bit about. It's really nice. This is a very, very powerful reporting tool, and it's one thing that I will say is this is the version of FastReport that ships with Rad Studio, and we've been able to create all those fantastic reports without having to upgrade to the professional version of FastReport. However, with the professional version of FastReport and on the higher versions, you get a lot more features, and those are things that you're going to have to consider. In many cases, it's very much worth your while to upgrade. It allows you, when you upgrade, it allows you to have event handlers that trigger while the report's being created, and allows you to do some very, very fancy data manipulations and property manipulations of objects while the report's being printed. You can also, some versions of FastReport allow you to let the user design their own reports, and that's certainly a feature that a lot of developers like, giving the options for their customers. Thank you very much for joining me today in this look at FastReport. You can download the slides and the sample code in both Delphi, Object Pascal, and C++ from jensendatasystems.com/CodeRageX. If you need to get in contact with me, my email address is cjensen@jensendatasystems.com. Our website is jensendatasystems.com. You can see my blog at caryjensen.blogspot.com, and you can follow me at Twitter. My handle's @Cary Jensen. Thank you again for joining me on this presentation, and I look forward to the upcoming question and answer session.
Okay, is FastReport compatible with DataSnap? I mean, the server prepare and send data to the client side where FastReport does the task. I don't know why not. I haven't actually used it inside of, I have not used FastReport inside of a service that is that doesn't have a user interface. But in fact, I did have, at one point, I was creating FastReports, and I actually created something, I think you probably could do it, because I created a FastReport inside something called a silent form, and this was a form that I never wanted displayed to the user, and I just couldn't use a data module for some reason. It could be that FastReport doesn't work on a data module because data modules don't support user interfaces, but I did manage to create a form, and I put this quick report on that form, and I created the form, but I never displayed it, and I was able to create fast reports that way. So I suspect that it is possible, but it is something that you might want to test out. I see that there is an answer that's provided. You can have DataSnap feed data from middle tier client applications, but I can't actually think why you wouldn't have to. I can't think of any reason why it might not be able to be possible, other than you might have to do something like what I did, which is create a form that's being created in memory on the DataSnap server, and generate the report, grab the stream, and then destroy that form that's never been displayed. Is there some way to migrate from Rave reports? Yes, FastReport has a number of converters. That's great. David, you were apparently answering those questions as things were going along, because that's a really, if you need to migrate your existing reports from another report designer, there are a number of converters. See, I'm working with FastReport for a long time, still get chills when thinking about it. about the time before FastReport. I agree. I think FastReport is really, really a wonderful tool, and I'm very impressed with it. It has done just about everything I've wanted, and something that I referred to at the end of the presentation was that you can upgrade FastReport to some really powerful features, but it's amazing what it'll do out of the box as it ships with RAD Studio. I'm not trying to suggest to anybody that they don't upgrade, because there are powerful features like letting your users be able to design their own reports and save them and then access them from your application. That does not come out of the box. Even something as simple as putting event handlers on the rendering of individual elements in the report and report bands, that is only available in the upgraded version. But as you saw in the example application I had, I was able to achieve a tremendous amount with the version that shipped with RAD Studio. So I would start there, but frankly, I think most developers are going to want some of those more advanced features, because it'll allow you to create reports that just go head and shoulders above almost anything you could do with other reporting tools. Okay, so someone here said, yeah, they built a non-visual unit that handles complete fast reports from code. Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. I know that I've done something, like I said, what I did is I had a form that had a fast report on it, but the form was never shown or shown modally. Well, that looks like the questions that are out there. David, do you have any questions, or is there any questions that you can think of that we should address? Well, let's see here. If I would like to export a report to PDF and send it directly by mail, any tips how to do this? Certainly, creating a fast report and as a PDF is a trivial matter, something that I have not done, and in fact, I expect that I'm going to be working with or doing this in the really near future, is generating the report and writing it to a stream. I suspect that is possible. You could always generate the report and have the PDF written to a file and then bring it in, so that's a possibility as well. And if you're using attachments and you're referring to as a file as an attachment, that certainly is a capability. So I would say you can do it. Even if you just set up, because here's one of the things you can do. You can suppress the printer dialog and the export dialog as well, and simply programmatically configure the export dialog for the PDF and specify a particular file. And you could do something clever like create the file name as a GUID and then attach that file, once it's written, attach that file to an email using attachments. So that certainly is a capability you can do. There was a question about the pricing of FastReport Professional. I don't think it's that terribly expensive. And the person said that they cannot live without the customers being able to design their own reports. So it's nice. Let's see, I might be even clipping off that question. But certainly it's not tremendously expensive to have that designing the end user design capability in your applications. So that's good.